where you're from and which area you serve. We would like to see who is represented here during today's webinar. As you just noticed, the webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube page shortly later on today. We'll have a QR code to our YouTube page as well towards the end of the meeting, so you can also see and view our other videos and webinars that we have on our YouTube page. So we see a few more people jumping in. Again, glad to have everybody join us. So before we dive into the content that we have prepared for you today, we do want to point out that we understand the Latino community is very diverse. We go by many names, as many of you are aware. Many of us identify as Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, and perhaps other terms that we don't necessarily have listed here. The important thing to recognize is we all identify differently, and there's not one term that can be applied to the general population. And so therefore, we recommend for those that are working with the Latino community to really assess and learn what terms or how they identify to see which one is more appropriate. Of course, in some communities that might vary. Now, during our webinar and through most of our education materials, we do utilize the term Latino. We still see that that's a term that's still a little more utilized and people are more familiar with, particularly our older Spanish-speaking Latino community members. But of course, that can vary from community to community. So we encourage everyone to know their community to see which term is more appropriate. We also want to point out that we recognize that some American Indian, Alaska Native, and other Mesoamerican indigenous communities use traditional tobacco for ceremonial, religious, and medicinal purposes. So our focus today is focused on commercial tobacco, not traditional tobacco. So please make note that all our strategies and recommendations that we provide throughout this webinar and our policy platform are intended to reduce commercial tobacco, which is manufactured and sold for recreational and habitual use. I also want to make a quick mention that we are aware that there might be an alarm going off at about 11:20. So of course, if you do see any disruption, we'll continue on, but just wanted to make everyone aware. Our webinar today has the following 4 objectives. Number 1, we want to reintroduce the program, our program staff, and our advisory committee, particularly for those that might be new to tobacco, and this is the first time you're hearing about the Latino Coordinating Center. We'll also provide an overview of the impact, the burden that tobacco has created in the Latino community all throughout California. Throughout our webinar as well, we'll mention specific examples, specific data from different regions of the state. We'll also highlight specific targeting tactics utilized by the tobacco industry. We'll identify some that have been used previously, and some of those that are utilized currently, and something to look out for the near future. And lastly, we'll provide a brief overview of our policy platform, its priorities, and how we can utilize that to counteract the tobacco industry's efforts to target the Latino community. So again, if this is the first time you're hearing about the Latino Coordinating Center, welcome. We are glad to have you join us. Our program is a program of the California Health Collaborative and work in partnership with USC to address tobacco-related disparities all throughout California. As the name says it, we are a coordinating center, so we really aim to coordinate with all the different programs funded by CTPP as well as non-traditional partners to work together in unison to minimize the burden that tobacco has had on our Latino community, our Latino families. Our main mission is to improve the overall health of Latinos in California by reducing tobacco, by implementing policy and system changes. We also strive to mobilize and empower our community members, and we have a wide array of services. If you have an interest to collaborate with us, we'll share our email at the very end of the webinar. We encourage all of you to reach out to us so we can see and explore collaboration and partnership opportunities in the near future. So here are our program staff. We are led by Avery Hernandez, who is the Senior Director of Program Services within the California Health Collaborative, as well as Dr. Lourdes Garbanati, who is our Principal Investigator through USC. Myself, as I mentioned earlier, I serve as the Project Director, and we're also joined. We'll have an opportunity throughout the webinar to hear from Luz Garcia, Kimberly Sanchez, both of which are regional coordinators, as well as Janet Rodriguez, who is our regional coordinator, as well as our evaluator working with USC in Southern California. So you have an opportunity to hear from our team, and maybe perhaps some of which you have already met. Please note our email addresses and contact information. So if you want to reach out to us individually, feel free to do so. I also want to briefly point out our advisory committee. We have a group of leaders in the realm of tobacco control, in the realm of working with Latino community and promoting overall health. We have Cindy Valencia, who is our advisory committee member representing California Quits. We also have Dr. Eddie Jara with Riverside University Health System. we have Gonzalo Coronado with Monterey County Public Health Department, Jose Montoya with the California Collaborative, who in fact is here, will be presenting towards the end of our webinar, talking about some of the information that he uncovered through the Tobacco Documents Library, highlighting specific efforts by the tobacco industry to target the Latino community. We also have Nora Manzanillo with the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, Marcela Gaitan with the National Alliance for Hispanic Health, and Monica Acevedo Guerrero with Public Health Advocates. So we want to highlight and thank our advisory committee for their guidance throughout the duration of our program. So let's explore and let's look at the impact that tobacco has had on the Latino community. Now, if you have met and spoke with the Latino community, they might say that tobacco is not necessarily such a big of a deal right now. They might think it's an issue of the past. And of course, we have seen overall in the state of California, cigarette use go down, but we still see an increase in certain products such as vaping and e-cigarettes. And we still see issues regarding cessation for the Latino community and gaps in resources. So by no means is tobacco a thing of the past. It is still a present issue. And in fact, it is a significant threat to the health of the community. Particularly, we want to point out that Latinos are the state's largest ethnic group, making up nearly 40% of California's total population. And that is projected only to increase to about 43% by the year of 2030. In fact, if we take a look at the county level, this is the state of California, and we see the different counties, and they're color-coded based on the amount of Latinos that reside within that county itself. So you can see the darker blue counties have the largest Latino community. And in fact, we see the Imperial County has the largest Latino population, followed by Tulare, Merced, San Benito, and Colusa County. And we have a long list of counties that have between 40 to 60% of their residents from or identify as Latinos. So you see them listed there. Monterey, we have Madera, Kings, Kern, many counties in the Central Valley, but also Southern California and Central Coast. And of course, you can see the breakdown. Now, why do we show this? We show this because we recognize that yes, there might be certain counties with a much smaller Latino population, but the majority of the state of California has a significant Latino community. And therefore, whether you're a competitor grantee, a local lead agency, or any organization that is joining us, we need to consider and we need to recognize that we have a large Latino population. And therefore, if we want to impact disparities, we want to reduce disparities, we need to address these issues that impact the Latino community. In fact, when we look at the CTCP's 2022 facts and figures, we see that about 9.8% of Latino adults use tobacco. Now, of course, you compare that to other racial and ethnic groups, African American, American Indian, much lower. However, because we have, as we previously mentioned, such a large Latino population in California, that is equivalent to about 1.1 million adults. This makes Latinos the second largest group of adult smokers in the state of California, only after non-Hispanic whites. So again, saying that this is a thing of the past, that this is not an issue in the Latino community, is quite frankly false. In fact, when we see other health issues that impact the Latino community, which we briefly mentioned, there is a correlation. Again, for example, diabetes, asthma, certain types of cancer, which are the leading causes of death among Latinos. There's also an association with either tobacco use or exposure to secondhand and third-hand smoke. In fact, 3 of the leading causes of death among Latinos, as I previously mentioned, cancer, heart disease, and stroke, are all linked to tobacco use. And another major issue, diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes, which is the 4th major cause of death among Latinos, there's also a correlation with tobacco use. And in fact, those that use tobacco or are exposed to secondhand smoke are either more likely to increase their risk of being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and they already have diabetes, it increases the risk of diabetes-related complications. So of course, it goes without saying that if we want to improve the overall health of Latinos, we want to reduce this mortality, or we want to increase the life expectancy among Latinos, and therefore we need to address and tackle the issue of tobacco in our communities. And again, for those who are joining us, as many have already done, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, your organization, and the communities that you serve. So considering the large Latino population that we have in California, it is crucial that we take efforts, that we prioritize addressing issues among priority populations. Of course, as the representative of the Latino Coordinating Center, we advocate for the Latino community. In fact, we believe, the Latino Coordinating Center believes, and we stand behind this statement, that addressing disparities among the Latino community is a vital step towards the end game of ending all commercial tobacco in the state of California. If we don't, or it's going to be difficult to reach that end game if we don't consider the large Latino community. So we need to implement policies that promote health among Latinos, and we need to engage and involve Latinos in this fight against big tobacco. So we're going to explore throughout this webinar the different tactics that the tobacco industry has implemented and currently implements within the Latino community. And I want to point out that these disparities that we just saw right now, the high prevalence of tobacco use, the mortality rates, the impact that it has, the burden that it's created, is not accidental. It is not by accident. It's not a coincidence that this is occurring among the California Latino community. This is a direct result of intentional targeting of the Latino community by the tobacco industry. And so this webinar, we're going to highlight 3 specific tactics. Number 1, we're going to explore the higher tobacco retail density and marketing in Latino communities. We're going to explore and mention the development and sale of flavored tobacco products tailored to Latinos and Latino youth. And we'll then identify how the tobacco industry has targeted elected officials to influence tobacco control policies, particularly to serve as an obstruction for our efforts that we're doing at the local level. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Yanet, who will share more about how the tobacco industry has had a more higher tobacco retail density and market its products in the Latino community.
Great, thank you so much, Rosendo. So as Rosendo mentioned, the strategies used by the tobacco industry are intentional. Since the 70s and 80s, Big Tobacco has been researching the Latino population and has launched numerous marketing initiatives to target different segments of the Latino population. You can see this in their many advertisements and branding efforts. In 1998, the Attorney Generals of 46 states signed the Master Settlement Agreement with the 4 largest tobacco companies in the United States to settle lawsuits to cover billions of dollars in costs associated with treating smoking-related illnesses. And this lawsuit resulted in $206 billion settlement, and a $200 billion settlement, which is going to be payable over 25 years. And the Master Settlement Agreement also imposed restrictions on the advertising, marketing, and promotion of cigarettes. So, for example, it prohibited youth-targeted ads that included cartoons such as Joe Camel. It also restricted marketing in magazines, prohibited marketing in magazines and in TV. And this settlement also required the tobacco industry to reveal their internal documents. And the internal documents revealed that the tobacco industry's interest in the community was because they deemed the population lucrative, easy to reach, and undermarketed. Our advisory committee member, Jose, is going to talk a little bit more about this and the research that he's done a little bit later in our webinar. So he's going to share a little bit more about that. And the reason I'm mentioning the Master Settlement Agreement is because this was a big turning point for the industry. They shifted gears and they started pouring tons of money at the point of sale in the retail environment. And so decades later, the tobacco industry has been infiltrating communities by compensating tobacco retail merchants for displaying advertisements, for doing promotions, and they're doing this in predominantly Hispanic Latino neighborhoods and other communities of color. So the tobacco industry spends approximately $9.4 billion annually to advertise and promote their products. And 90% of the industry spending goes towards advertising and promoting their tobacco products in the retail environment, such as in convenience stores, gas stations, and other retail outlets. And unfortunately, Latinos are disproportionately affected by the presence of targeted marketing and tobacco products in the retail environment. It is well known and documented that there are more tobacco retail stores in communities of color compared to non-Hispanic white and more affluent communities. We know that in the Latino community, there is a higher density of retailers that sell tobacco. Specifically, there are 103 tobacco retailers per 100,000 residents, compared to only 78 retailers per 100,000 residents in the general population. So neighborhoods that are predominantly Latinx have nearly 26% more tobacco retailers than in areas that have more white residents. Here you can see a map of Santa Ana and its neighboring city of Irvine. And you can see that there are many tobacco retailers, more compared to the neighboring city of Irvine. So there's more tobacco retailers in Santa Ana than in Irvine. So the red dots represent tobacco retail stores, and the yellow areas represent schools. So you could see, and actually let me give a little background information. Irvine has 43% non-Hispanic white community compared to a 12% Hispanic Latino community, compared to Santa Ana, that has a 30% non-Hispanic white community and 77% Hispanic Latino community. You could see that there are 231 tobacco retailers in Santa Ana compared to only 76 in Irvine. To top it off, close to half, about 45% of retailers in Santa Ana are within 1,000 feet of schools, compared to only 5% of retailers in Irvine that are close to 1,000 feet within of schools. So this data was pulled from the California Tobacco Health Assessment tool developed by Stanford University, and it's a really great tool to use for your own jurisdictions. In fact, this slide was actually used in a presentation with elected officials in Santa Ana, and they were really surprised about this data. It was an impactful slide to show them and was one of the many tools used to help them understand the issue better, which eventually led to the passing of a flavor ordinance in Santa Ana. So why is this a problem? Well, there is research that shows that close proximity of tobacco retailers increases the likelihood of initiation of tobacco use among youth and young adults. And why is this, right? Well, tobacco advertising and promotions have a big effect on youth, and the tobacco industry knows this really, really well. As mentioned before, exposure to marketing and these products increases the chances adolescents will start using these tobacco products. And research shows that youth are 3 times more sensitive than adults to tobacco advertising. And youth are more likely to be influenced by cigarette marketing than by peer pressure. So it's also important to note that the more youth see marketing or people using these products, the act of using these products becomes normalized. So we have done a lot of work to change the social norms around smoking, and we need to continue to work on reducing the marketing and availability of these products so that it does not become normal to use these products. Higher numbers of tobacco retailers in a community perpetuates social norms around the availability of tobacco products, and it also exposes community members to more of the marketing, and it also, which causes initiation, but it also causes difficulty quitting for people that want to quit using these products. There's also research that shows that Latinx communities also have higher rates of stores that sell to underage customers. So there's also a difference in the types of products and amounts and in the products and the amount and types of marketing in retail stores. So for example, at USC, we conducted a large-scale retail environment study where we were able to compare retailers from different ethnic communities. We found that little cigars and cigarillos and flavored little cigars and cigarillos were 3 times more likely to be available in Hispanic Latino communities than in non-Hispanic communities. So little cigars and cigarillos are more available, and small packs tend to be cheaper than cigarettes, which may appeal to price-sensitive populations such as youth and low socioeconomic populations. So what can be done about this? In our Latino policy platform, we encourage jurisdictions to pass a tobacco retail license ordinance, or for short, we say TRL. A TRL ordinance requires that all tobacco retailers obtain a license to ensure that retailers comply with responsible retail practices. This can be done at the city, county, or state level. With this mechanism, jurisdictions can require licensed retailers to pay an annual fee, which can fund administration and enforcement activities such as store inspections and youth purchase compliance checks. California state law already requires tobacco retailers to be licensed. However, local jurisdictions can enact their own tobacco retail license laws to close gaps in the state and federal tobacco laws and provides a locally controlled source of funding for enforcement. So tobacco retail licensing can also be used with other innovative solutions. And in our policy platform, we talk about how you could add plugins. So for example, controlling the location and density of tobacco retailers, such as zoning, as well as imposing additional restrictions on the sale and promotion of tobacco products, such as restricting the sale of flavored tobacco products. And research has shown that policies that reduce the availability of tobacco products and make it more difficult for youth to purchase tobacco products are actually effective strategies to reduce the initiation and use of tobacco products by youth. A study conducted in Southern California by USC found that having strong enforcement preventing sales to minors was actually associated with lower rates of youth and adult initiation of combustible and e-cigarette use. So communities that had tobacco retail licenses with sufficient fees to conduct enforcement efforts, such as sting operations, had lower rates of youth cigarettes and e-cigarette use. And there are several research studies that show these same findings. So policy works. Now I would like to introduce Kimberly, who will discuss how the tobacco industry targets the Latino community with their products.
Thank you, Yanet. Hello, everybody. So now we'll dive into the development and sale of flavored tobacco products tailored to Latinos. So to begin, we first want to take a step back and show a brief timeline of the tobacco industry. So when the tobacco industry first began or first launched, the traditional focus for their advertising was to create a product that appealed to the male individuality, their masculinity, and an interest in the outdoors, and overall a desire for a well-made product. But just as everything changes, so does the tobacco industry advertising. So now the industry has adapted to the modern times and has even had a new consumer goal of appealing to not only different ethnic and racial diverse groups, but to our youth. And unlike any other consumer industry who has begun to include different populations and communities to increase their profits, the tobacco industry stands as the only industry who creates products that kills when used as directed. In fact, in recent years, we've seen how they began marketing their products to youth and young adults, and in doing so, they want to make sure they are adapting their product design to align with trends that our youth participates in, such as being more into sleek design technology, more into convenience, and who are also worried about hiding this habit from the adults in their life. So they're keeping all of this in mind to create products for kids to be able to sneak them into their backpacks or their drawers without raising any questions, just so they can create a new generation of tobacco users. And they know that most tobacco users start as teenagers, and flavored products just make it easier for them to start. So with this in mind, the tobacco industry even takes a further step when it comes to targeting our marginalized groups, such as our Latino youth. So one of the things we really want to share with you all are the tactics that the industry uses to appeal to the Latino population through their flavored and liquid products. So usually these flavors oftentimes include traditional dishes that are common in Latino households, which they usually try to select from our sweet desserts and our snacks, and that's usually what our youth is more interested in at their young age. But they make sure they do it very carefully to choose flavors that kids are used to and grew up eating at their family parties or at home, or things that they can buy at the grocery store. So many of these products can feel very nostalgic because they may smell or leave an aftertaste of the foods that we grew up eating. And we see common flavors such as tres leches, churros, flan, and horchata, which all have flavors that remind us of our culture and our childhood. And it demonstrates how the industry is really spending thousands on researching what our community is interested in, just so they can learn how to appeal and design their products towards us and essentially use our culture against us. And to elaborate a little bit more on the marketing practices that the industry uses, we can see here that the way that these products are marketed, they usually all have a similar checklist to them that can help identify products targeted towards the youth. So first, they want to make sure that the flavor is appealing or enticing enough for a minor who's in the store to be curious of the flavor by having the tobacco product resemble a treat that they've had at home before. So here that flavor would be a strawberry shortcake ice cream. The next step would be to have a bright and colorful and even a somewhat cute packaging to catch their attention. They're really well aware of the interest younger generations have in posting their interests or activities on social media. So they try to make sure their products are aesthetically pleasing and attractive enough to be posted on these platforms so that teenagers can essentially work as free advertising for them in hopes of creating trends among their friends. And finally, they want to make sure that in case the name of the flavor and the packaging isn't enough to make them curious to try, then the industry will go out of its way to have a resembling name or even logo attached to the product packaging of that popular dessert. So here we can see that the name of their tobacco product resembles the strawberry shortcake ice cream by having their product be named strawberry sweet cake ice cream. So again, these are just a few ways that can help you identify these products that demonstrate who their actual target audience is. And another thing worth mentioning that we wanted to bring to your attention is the most recent data from the California Facts and Figures, which shows tobacco use among high school students, specifically Hispanic and Latinos. We have less than 1% who currently report using cigarettes, 4.6% who vape, and 5.6% who report any tobacco. So when considering these numbers, it's important to reflect back onto the data presented earlier about how Latinos are the state's largest ethnic group, which means that these numbers do translate into a much more larger scale. And with these numbers in mind, we want to recognize that Latino individuals who identify as LGBTQ+ are more likely to smoke hookah than their heterosexual counterparts. In fact, in California, we have the highest amount of hookah lounges, and many of them are being placed near community colleges, which is very alarming because almost half of community college students identify as Hispanic or Latino. And these placements can be due because many jurisdictions are having exemptions for hookah when they're adopting flavored tobacco ordinances. So it's very important to also identify and include these products when working at the local level, especially because a single smoking session of hookah is equivalent to smoking 100 or more cigarettes. In fact, here at the LCC, we actually created a hookah fact sheet highlighting hookah use in the Latino LGBTQ+ communities. And you can scan the QR code here, or we can share the link to that in the chat box in a few moments. So we also wanted to bring attention to the emergence in non-tobacco oral nicotine products that are somewhat a new type of commercial nicotine product that includes flavored nicotine pouches, non-therapeutic nicotine gums, lozenges, and tablets, and nicotine gummies. These are not to be confused with NRT or nicotine replacement therapy gums or lozenges that are associated with cigarette smoking cessation. These flavored non-therapeutic products are being advertised as tobacco-free and are not approved as cessation aids. And what we're seeing with these emerging products is an interest adolescents are having with them due to how easy they are to hide from their parents or any authority figure because they are disguised as any other gum or candy-like product. In fact, in a recent study conducted in Southern California, research found that flavored non-tobacco oral nicotine products are the second most prevalent nicotine product used by adolescents in Southern California. So these products may have several attributes that might attract youth. For example, these brand products resemble candies, which may seem familiar to the youth, and come in many fruity and playful flavors such as cherry bomb, blue raz, and fruit medley. In fact, they even show the act of putting a piece of gum or gummy in their mouth might make them feel like they're not really doing anything dangerous, or might feel less risky than if they were to pick up smoking a cigarette. But most of all, these products are designed to be discreet and easily concealed. Sometimes these products might even be hard to identify in comparison from regular gum or candy. And these brands take advantage of this by creating digital media campaigns that are marketed as a lower risk alternative to inhalable nicotine products. So how does this relate to our Hispanic or Latino youth? Well, it was found that Hispanic or Latino adolescents were at greater risk of having used oral nicotine products compared with those with other racial and ethnic identities. Additionally, adolescents from disadvantaged populations also appear to be at greatest risk of having used these products, including sexual and gender minority youth, which is why it's important for us as advocates to monitor the emergence of these new products, especially because the surveillance of non-tobacco oral nicotine product use among our youth merits priority for national policy to protect pediatric populations. And on that note, I'll go ahead and pass it on to my colleague Luz, who will show us how the tobacco industry has influence on our policies.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Luz Garcia, also with the Latino Coordinating Center. So I will be talking about how there is the targeting of elected officials to influence tobacco control policies by highlighting one specific example. Next slide. And some of you who have been in tobacco control may be aware of this already, but this might be new to some of you who are just starting to get into tobacco. So last year in 2022, there was some attention towards the sponsorship of Altria on the Latino Caucus of California counties. Next slide. And before I get into the actual event, I just want to start by introducing both Altria and the Latino Caucus of California counties. So for those of you that do not know, Altria Group Inc., formerly known as Philip Morris Companies Inc., is an American corporation headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, and one of the largest producers and marketers of tobacco, cigarettes, and related products. Some of the prominent brands that are owned by Altria include Marlboro, Philip Morris USA, US Smokeless Tobacco Company, but there are many more. Next slide. This is just a little something that I pulled from their website. So their vision stated, at least in one sentence, is to responsibly lead the transition of adult smokers to a smoke-free future, and led by our cultural aspiration. So a couple other things that I just wanted to highlight were some words and phrases that they also included in their vision, such as harm reduction, commonly used in public health language, FDA regulation, and also reducing the risk of tobacco products. Next slide. And although they allege sort of this positive image of themselves, Altria has faced significant legal and regulatory challenges related to the health risk associated with tobacco products. In fact, common lawsuits against Altria have said that have alleged that the company knew about health risk associated with smoking, but failed to adequately warn the public, that the company engaged in deceptive marketing practices to downplay the risk of smoking, and that they were responsible for health costs incurred by individuals in governmental health programs due to smoking-related illnesses. Next slide. So now to introduce the Latino Caucus of California counties, not to be confused with the statewide Latino Caucus. So something that they share in their mission, I'm just going to read it here, is that the Latino Caucus of California counties is an organization which encourages the engagement and involvement of its board and membership, works to provide solutions to issues and concerns, promotes Latino leaders, provides value to the California State Association of Counties, as well as the Latino community, which they serve. And finally, they work in a cooperative manner with the California State Association of Counties and other areas of interest to all Californians. Next slide. And as I mentioned, in 2022, we learned that the Latino Caucus of California Counties was being sponsored by Altria. we did some research and found out that the sponsorship was likely between the amounts of $15,000 or $25,000. Next slide. The way we figured this out was basically we went to the Latino Caucus of California County's website, and we saw the different memberships that one can pay for. So being the silver membership, $5,000, gold, $15,000, and platinum, $25,000. Next slide. And with each membership, we noticed that there were different sort of perks for the members. So for example, here you can see that the first perk is that you have the company link on the LCCC website, not to be confused with SLCC. And if you have the gold or the platinum membership, then you have your logo included on their website. And we do see the Altria logo on the LCCC website. And they have other perks as well. So they can attend meetings, they can get rosters of membership. So they're getting the names of the elected officials or just people with power that are part of this group. In addition, they can attend events, annual retreats, and more. Next slide. So here I just listed a screenshot of the Latino Caucus of California Counties. If you go to the About Us and then click on our sponsors, you can see that Altria is one of their sponsors. Next slide. And one of the reasons why we're bringing this up is because, again, last year in 2022, we confirmed that several members from the LCCC were approached by Altria staff. And Altria was in fact providing talking points on harm reduction, and even asked if modified risk tobacco products could be included in tobacco control policies that were potentially being passed. Next slide. And we think that this was likely due to an FDA order that was permitting the sale of modified risk tobacco products. And if you do not know what a modified risk tobacco product, it refers to a single specific product. It's not an entire class of tobacco products. And also there is an application process to get this modified risk tobacco product sort of label or I guess, I don't know, almost like a petition, so you can actually be able to sell this product. Next slide. And again, just highlighting the real life impact that we have seen of sort of not only Altria new marketing strategy, or maybe not necessarily new marketing strategy, but adaptive marketing strategy. We have heard that Altria's talking points have been repeated by caucus members, including during a Board of Supervisors meeting in Monterey County, in which the board was voting on the passage of a tobacco retail license. And in fact, this board member is actually now the chair of the Latino Caucus of California Counties. Next slide. So some of the efforts that our staff has taken to sort of counteract Altria's marketing strategies is, one, we have talked to some of the caucus members regarding our concerns over Altria sponsorship. And we did hear that not all members supported the decision to accept Altria sponsorship. And according to a caucus member, we were told that the decision was made by leadership. So again, really highlighting that not all caucus members are in support of this sponsorship. Next slide. That said, I just want to highlight that this is an ongoing issue that we're seeing. So this is a different image of also what is also a sponsorship from Altria for the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce. Next slide. And we also know that on Altria's website, actually, they account for other political contributions they have made to various candidates, political parties, PACs, caucus committees, independent expenditure committees, entities, and ballot measure committees in the US. And I listed some here. Next slide. And then I also wanted to highlight some other sponsorships that Altria has been involved in that are really Hispanic Latino led organizations. So again, really big concern, especially when we know, based on what all my colleagues have shared, the way not only Altria, but just tobacco companies in general are marketing to our communities and also the talking points that they're using. They're really adopting the public health language of harm reduction and trying to paint themselves as an ally of health and public health at large. Next slide. So really the last thing that I want to highlight is just this educational material that we created. It's really a policy brief. We titled it, "Don't Be Fooled by the Tobacco Industry's Deceptive Harm Reduction Strategies." And this material is targeted at elected officials or just individuals of power, whether they're at the local level, county, state, any individual with power, and letting them know about these strategies that tobacco companies are using that are deceptive, and they are harmful to our communities, and also trying to engage them in a conversation where we as public health advocates can identify better strategies that will support our efforts. And you can go ahead and scan the QR code, or I think someone shared the link also in the chat box. But with that, I will pass it on to Jose Montoya, who's one of our advisory committee members. And he will begin talking, go a little bit more in depth about historical tactics that the company has used by going over the tobacco industry documents. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Let me see here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Jose.
Perfect. So my name is Jose Montoya, and I work for the STAND program. I am part of the Latino Coordinating Center advisory board, and I'm here today just to chat real quick about some of the documents that I looked at and found very interesting, specifically on this issue, where they, use deceptive targeting and so on, and how they influence marketing and so on. So one of the things is, I want to begin before I begin and talk. I'd like to introduce an engagement exercise. I think it's very helpful when we're all engaged. If everyone can do me a favor, when you hear something new or interesting, please post on the chat the term nugget. This will help me know what content is interesting for future presentations. So, the truth documents, Yanez kind of went over some of the background knowledge of how the truth documents actually came out. They were formerly known as the legacy tobacco documents, and they were created in 2002 by the UCSF library. It was built to house and provide permanent access to tobacco industry internal corporate documents produced during litigation between the US states and 7 major tobacco industry organizations and other sources. These internal documents give a view into the working of one of the largest and most influential industries in the United States. So the mission of the UCSF Industry Documents Library is to identify, collect, curate, preserve, and make freely accessible internal documents created by the industries and their partners, which have an impact on public health for the benefit and use of policymakers, researchers, clinicians, educators, students, and the general public around the surrounding areas and internationally. So one of the things, next slide, I'm going to be sharing and reading from some of the quotes to highlight many of the internal conversations about deceptive targeting by the tobacco industry. So this is pretty much, when you look at them, when you read them, it's very interesting and it just jaw dropping. It just makes you kind of mad, upset, but also it creates a passion in you to understand who you're dealing with here. So the UCSF Truth Tobacco documents have, how many of the documents are housed at UCSF? There's about 15 million documents, 92 million pages, 8,000 audio visual items, and 45 separate collections. And there's actually been more released recently through Jewel. Some of the settlements that have happened through Jewel Also for the opioid epidemic, there's also been some release about that company and their corporate structure. So I want to read this here, and pretty much this slide is very interesting and it stood out to me. It says, Blacks and Hispanics traditionally link their trial and purchase of products and their legislative and editorial support directly to their understanding and belief that a company cares about their communities and issues. And to me, that kind of stood out because it put it into perspective on some of the issues that Yaneth and some of the other presenters were talking about these, the industry taking advantage of certain situations, specifically culture within our respected areas. So another quote here is, coordinate and participate in all company. So this is what they want. They want RJ Reynolds to coordinate and participate in all company activities that touch minority audiences, to leverage opportunities and contacts and gain optimum communication credibility and goodwill for RJ Reynolds. So I thought that was interesting. Next slide. Hispanics seem to have a desire for premium cig brands, possibly to demonstrate their progress. Another was Hispanic smokers seem to want to demonstrate their progress and their desire to be seen as stylish and high class. From a tactical perspective, RJR's Hispanic approach has incorporated a cultural identity and used Spanish language, therefore maximizing relevance to 75 to 80% of the market. This is essentially what the other tobacco markets are doing. So I thought that was interesting. Slide 3. This is where full price discounting comes into play, and this is a form of business strategy that some companies will use. But here's a quote: the Fresno Visalia market seems to be predominantly blue collar and agriculture worker dominated. Hispanic population represents over 40% of the total adults living in this area. The median income is $27,593, with 36% of the population earning under $20,000. So you see the next slide, the next slide after that. Here we go. So the next slide talks about the objective is to close the current gap between full price and the fourth tier, which is currently at 88 cents and greater. This is a strategy because they know how addictive tobacco is at the time, that they can actually lower the price to actually get people more addicted to their product by giving low brands, I guess, maximum subsidy for the acquiring of new clientele that are stuck and dependent on nicotine dependency. So we'll go to the next slide. And this one is very interesting because it kind of describes how based on the market share performance program has matured successfully in San Francisco. So it shows how this strategy actually was successful in San Francisco, San Jose, Fresno, Denver, and Las Vegas. Media attention indicates continued anti-smoking pressure. However, recent events in cities with anti-smoking policies indicate an unpredictable political social trend. Special events and nightclub activity continue to generate trial and excitement for Camel. The migrant farm worker population needs specific program attention. When Camel and Marlboro compete head to head at an event or retail level, Camel has enough visual promotional impact to win consumer attention, trial, and continued interest. So they're pretty much saying, like, hey, if they go head to head and we focus on nightclubs and other attention and give this to sponsor events and so on, we can actually win. It's important we look at these documents to understand. Well, what's interesting about this is that, and I'll go to the next slide. Let me go. Yeah. So this is where you start seeing the receipts and you start seeing the payout of sponsored events. So here's one that I found. Camel will sponsor the subject event. This one talks about the Manteca Lowrider Show. That's pretty close to us here in Central California. And what that is Camel sponsored $1,300 for that event. Next slide. Here's another one where this is actually more for another lowrider show, and it's for $57,300. At that back then, that was a lot of money. That could actually sponsor many years for these events. But this was a sponsorship, and it shows that they're looking at what is the young folks, what are the youth really involved with, and really it's lowrider shows at the time, and other events. Next slide. So here's one that Marlboro sponsored. And for those who like Los Temerarios, Banda Maguey, Los Tucanes de Tijuana, this was Marlboro sponsoring a music event where 15,000 people actually attended this event. And when they attend these events, of course, there's a lot of free marketing that's happening through Camel and Marlboro and all these other other industries or brands, and they're just trying to get brand loyalty at these events. Next slide. And here's an event, another receipt from the Chicano Park Steering Committee, which they sponsored the Chicano Moratorium in San Diego, this industry. And what they did is when they went out and did this, I asked some of the organizers at the time when I found this out, I asked some of them, like Seferino Garcia, who was part of the steering committee, I asked them, why did you take this money? And they let me know that, hey, at the time, they took, they let us feel, they made us feel special, and they came out to us and gave us money, along with, other brands and so on. Next slide. This was another one for the next year, another 10,000. Camel actually at this one, I asked one of the Chicano studies professors that I had that actually went to this one. And he remembers Camel having a booth where families can come and actually take pictures. So I'm sure there's a bunch of pictures out there with Camel, the character, around families, and sponsor. They were giving out jackets, he said, mugs. They were giving out all kinds of stuff at this one. Next slide. So this goes back to the 9.4 billion being used in marketing expenditures nationwide. And I believe Ines hit on this issue, but it's an annual tobacco industry that, that's marketing to us through events. They're targeting us and so on. Next slide. And I want to share that, I found some of these pictures. I found this picture where Big Tobacco was actually saying that they're environmentally friendly now, and that they're trying to get out of the tobacco or the cigarette business. And I thought that was interesting because now they're putting themselves into environmental justice and also other important issues that are affecting us. So in conclusion, it's important that we look at these documents to understand who we are dealing with. We are not small or infinitesimal. We are a collective history of targeted groups by this irresponsible industry, the tobacco industry. I would like to thank the LCC for this opportunity to share these important documents. With that said, I'll pass it on to Rosendo to cap it off. Thanks.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you for that great information. Now, as we approach Howard, we want to just emphasize that we have in the previous year developed the policy platform, which identifies specific steps to address these disparities, to address some of the issues that we previously mentioned. In fact, our policy platform includes 4 specific policy priorities. The first of which is to prevent youth initiation of tobacco use. Within this priority, we identify specific policies, such as those that Yaneth mentioned, a tobacco retail license, zoning, flavor restrictions, right? All of which are potential solutions, potential counter arguments or counter activities to ensure that the tobacco industry isn't able to target the Latino community. The second priority is to reduce the exposure of secondhand smoke and aerosols among Latino communities, really focusing on smoke-free policies, whether it be multi-unit housing, community colleges, the workplace, and other environments in which Latinos are constantly at. Obviously, we know that the constant exposure to secondhand smoke, including third-hand smoke, poses a significant threat to the health of Latinos and Latino families. Third, we want to promote tobacco cessation and treatment to ensure that there's more cessation services for our Latino community in a way that's culturally and linguistically appropriate, and just logistically in a way that works for the Latino community in regards to accessibility, timeframes that are available, and ensuring that is in the language that is most relevant to the Latino community. And lastly, to build community capacity and leadership, we talked about elected officials being targeted, and we should also, as community, as Latinos, be able to mobilize, communicate with elected officials, and provide them with the information that's necessary to let them know what exactly is going on. So that way, as we identify in a policy brief, they are not fooled by the tobacco industry's efforts to try to sell harm reduction. We know harm reduction does not apply to tobacco, should not be utilized in tobacco because there is no safe level of tobacco use. And so I want to encourage everybody to view our policy platform and utilize that really as a guide and really to identify different resources that can help us stand up against the tobacco industry. For so long, they've targeted us, and so therefore it's important that we take a step in our respective communities to then address these disparities to ensure that we work in unison to reduce the tobacco disparities among the Latino community with the goal of improving the overall health. So we are about the hour, so we might not say have an opportunity for questions at this moment. I do want to point out again that this webinar is recorded, is being recorded, will be made available. We'll also provide the slides if anybody's interested. Feel free to send an email to us. We'll provide you the slides as well as the additional materials that were highlighted in today's webinar. Also encourage you to take our survey by scanning the QR code on your screen. We'd love to hear your feedback to see if this webinar was helpful and how we can improve future webinars. Feel free to also include any recommendations for additional topics that you feel might be necessary. On the chat box, you can also see the links again to our survey as well as to our YouTube page. So you can find that either in the chat box or by scanning the QR code on your screen. And of course, we welcome you. We encourage you to reach out to any one of us, whether it be on social media or via email, because we really are striving to collaborate with all of you to work together as a community, as a state, to reach the tobacco endgame, to stand up against the tobacco, and again, to improve the overall health of the Latino community. So out of respect of everybody's time, we'll go ahead and conclude at this point. But if you have any urgent questions or have any requests for additional information, presentation, perhaps more at the local level, please feel free to reach out to any one of us and we'll be glad to address any of those questions you might have. So again, with that, we'll go ahead and conclude the webinar. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.